My name is Jofin, and I use she, her pronouns. I do love to be called Jofi, so feel free to do whichever. As long as you say the word Joe, I will respond. So as a kid, I never fit in, because I was always on the outskirts of the dominant culture. In the Indian and Canadian context, being a Christian is a minority, but within that minority in Canada, our family was one of the only brown families in church. I'm Canadian, but I'm not Canadian enough for the Canadians, and I'm not Indian enough for the Indians. I'm Indian, but I'm not Punjabi. I'm Tamil, but I'm not Hindu. And I have a white passing name and an accent, but I look like me. Tonight, I want to share a little bit of my background to explain my journey to becoming an ally. So the church I went to growing up is a part of the Anglican network in Canada. And what you really need to understand from that name is that it's anti-queer. So there was a period of time that I was pro-life, homophobic, and desperately trying to make myself as white as possible. We can chat about which one I'm embarrassed about later. However, at the same time, I was in public school. This meant I had already started questioning some of the things I was being taught, like evolution being fake, explicitly and implicitly at church. Also, I was a dorky nerd. If you've been in class with me, you know. And I was being bullied, and some of the only safe people in school were queer people for me. So there was this little spark in the back of my head going, maybe Jesus does like the gays. Finally, thank you, Edison, for that. Finally, one of the more progressive youth leaders at church called me out for something I said that was really homophobic. And for me, that ignited the fire in me to start questioning why I believed the things I believed in. You can imagine that I was raised in a certain household, being Tamil and Anglican, and that isn't for the faint of heart. And one part of my cultural upbringing is that you never question what your elders tell you. And so me being the goody two-shoes I am, I've never questioned what they told me. Fortunately, in my undergrad years, I have spent time questioning the perspectives I held and took responsibility to do a lot of unlearning. And it happened as a part of the courses I took, the people I met, the conversations that happened in lounges, at dinner tables, and I also frequently took the initiative to be a part of training, workshops, gender cafes or gender fish bowls, and honestly anything that sparked my interest or stoked the fire of curiosity. And they are all responsible for the Jofin you see here today. One who is trying to figure out adult life while navigating what a decolonized and unoppressed faith looks like. As a part of that now, I regularly attend the church as a part of Anglican Church of Canada, and that is an inclusive and pro-queer branch of Anglican churches. I have also started creating sexual and reproductive health education content on Instagram and TikTok to inform others who might be engulfed in misinformation, myths, and just misconceptions like I was. I want to lead by example and be an inclusive and safe human being, and I know from personal experience that colored communities can be vicious and Christian communities can be hostile, which then results in a very cruel overlap on the Venn diagram of homophobia and transphobia. I'm especially passionate about shining a light on these issues because my existence as a colored Christian ally, while challenging people, can demonstrate how easily one can be a decent human being. And I hope it eases the invisible labor that queer people have to do constantly by educating and advocating, because I know I get tired of talking to racist and sexist bigots. But untangling the basis for colored Christian understandings that oppress in the name of religion is not that easy. You have to understand that when the Portuguese, the French, the Spanish, the Americans, the English colonized our ancestral lands, they brought with them the following illnesses: rigid patriarchy, heteronormativity, purity, and white supremacy. In order to survive, our ancestors added these foreign ideologies into their own. Now they are so untangled and enmeshed, creating double the burden for colored queer folk. Fortunately for some of us, we are unlearning, I promise, and realize that homophobia and transphobia comes from this history. However, many of us, conversations about sex, bodily autonomy, reproductive health are still limited or non-existent. On top of this, there are these notions of proper and improper conduct in society. So this is very improper, by the way. And when these conversations do happen, things like the acknowledgement of queer people and education about their experiences and sexuality are intentionally left out. From this standpoint then, procreative sex is the right kind of sex and ideal kind of sex. Besides, why would you do work without seeing the fruit of it? Not to point out the obvious here, that then leaves behind a gaping hole where pleasure, queer sex, and other non-procreative activities should be. Since none of these things are talked about, they aren't normalized, so then they become unattainable, stigmatized, criminalized, and fetishized. This leads to repression, frustration, and various levels of sexual violence. Because people exist within such a rigid system, it does not allow them to explore their sexuality ever. What can then be further isolating and frustrating is that the struggles and trauma of the previous generation often belittles and dismisses the experiences of the current generation. In such a setting, when we bring up feelings, they bring up famine, us mental struggles, then the struggle for freedom, us sexual orientation, then war, us gender identity, then genocide. Unlike previous generations, I am of the belief that the current generation is doing better at understanding both their ancestors' trauma and their own. The suffering of our ancestors has been and continues to be smothered, and that fire does need to be stoked a little and allowed its time to burn. Only then can we collectively heal and get through it. However, this is no excuse to extinguish the light of queer individuals in our communities or to further fan the flames of other injustices faced by this generation. All of this being said, I would like to shine a light on the fact that our generation is undoing the trauma that our ancestors endured and caused. We are going beyond just surviving, and we're learning to live. Like with any learning, that is going to take some time and effort. However, even in this time of Andrew Tates and other hate mongers, our generation is making steady progress. For example, I have recently discovered queer-friendly spaces and events geared towards colored individuals specifically. There are influencers like Sundar V, for example, and others who are so open about their queerness and bring representation to some much-needed spaces. And my part, in addition to the content I create, was doing research at Trin. I was awarded an undergraduate student research award last summer, and I chose to do the research that addressed this intersection of race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, and religious and spirituality. I investigated if levels of sexual distress change when someone belongs to more than one of these groups. The results showed that being a part of a sexual minority very minimally influenced sexual distress, if you want to know numbers, just by 3%. What was more important was that all individuals have daily spiritual experiences, concepts of forgiveness, religious and spiritual coping mechanisms, and religious support through their communities. I'm sure you can infer how I felt about my time at Trin because of the themes I addressed here tonight. But I am proud of myself for the fact that Trin's name will forever be a part of inclusive research. I'm glad to have been vocal about where I stand as an ally in spaces where it was okay for people to flaunt their bigotry. I know I'm nowhere near perfect, but I am busting my ass to see what else I can do to shine my light so I can illuminate others' paths. Thank you.